Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Global Connections Television is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision to view previous shows. Also, if you're involved with a community access television or a PBS station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you'd like to share our programs, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided free at no cost as a public service to help people better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're going to look at a very international program, well really two programs to a large degree, and talk about the United States Peace Corps and what it's doing to help people overseas. But also we're going to talk about the National Peace Corps Association. And my guest is an expert on both of these. My guest today is Jonathan Pearson. Jonathan Pearson is the Advocacy Director with the National Peace Corps Association. Between 1987 and 1989, Jonathan was a Peace Corps volunteer in Lamtok Atoll in the Federated States of Micronesia, serving as a teacher and community development worker. Jonathan, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being with me. That's Micronesia. That's a tough assignment, buddy. But I want to hear more about it as we go along. But let's talk a little bit about the United States Peace Corps. So I recall President John F. Kennedy, who was campaigning in '60, made the announcement at the University of Michigan he wanted to do something bold to reach out to help people in economically developing countries. So he came up with this Peace Corps concept. It came online in '61. What was the purpose of the Peace Corps, and what were the three major goals of the Peace Corps?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting how it evolved, because in the late 1950s and leading into 1960, there was increasing discussion at the policy level about establishing an international volunteer program along the lines of the Peace Corps. And you mentioned the University of Michigan. Mm-hmm. That was a trigger moment and it was an interesting circumstance in that candidate Kennedy, running for president at that time, was running very late on the campaign stop at the student union at the University of Michigan. I think he arrived sometime around 2 in the morning, and he and his team thought nobody would be there to hear him. And when they came to the student union, there were thousands of people still waiting, and many of them students. And at that rally, he asked the students, would you be willing to serve your country in Latin America or Africa as teachers or healthcare workers? And that triggered a petition drive, not with our modern day electronic petitions, but old-fashioned petition drives started by students that crisscrossed around the country of people saying, yes, I want to serve our country in this way. And that really led to the establishment of the Peace Corps. Mm-hmm. And in regards to the third goals, they were established by Sergeant Shriver, President Kennedy's son-in-law. They remain the same to this brother-in-law, excuse me, pardon me, his brother-in-law, and remain to this day as first of all development work, working in communities around the world to bring forth development, work side by side with counterparts. The second goal of the Peace Corps is the concept of, by being in those communities, helping people all around the world to gain a better understanding of Americans, who they are, and what we're like individually. And then the third goal of the Peace Corps, which is the aspect of American Peace Corps volunteers coming back to this country and sharing their experiences. In other words, bringing the world back home to our communities. Mm-hmm.
Well, with full disclosure, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic about 100 years ago, it seems like. But I took that third goal seriously and came back and got involved with a wide range of groups. And we had an Office of Federal and International Relations in the Kentucky State Legislature for many years, and I headed up that office. But also this program, Global Connections Television, is a direct offshoot of that, because it is important, it was important, it still is, to bring that experience home and to share it with people. Well, let's talk about the Peace Corps today. How many volunteers have served from 1961 through today, more or less, approximately.
Yeah,
And how many are serving today?
Right, approximately 230,000 is the current rough number, and at present there are about between 7,000 and 7,500 volunteers. There are always volunteers coming and going, finishing their assignments as new people come in. So the number fluctuates from month to month, but the rough number right now is about 7,000 to 7,500.
Does the Peace Corps have a goal of upping that? Is the demand greater? Could you use more Peace Corps volunteers?
The demand is absolutely greater. There's been a jump in applications for people that want to serve as Peace Corps volunteers in recent years. The ratio of applications to assignment opportunities is in the neighborhood of 6 to 1. So within that framework, there are a lot of people who want to serve their nation as Peace Corps volunteers, but then are not given that opportunity because of a lack of positions. And at the other end of the spectrum, because one of the unique things about Peace Corps programs is that Peace Corps only goes to a country if they are invited by the country. But there are many countries that are asking for volunteers or who have a volunteer program and wish to expand on it. So there's both a supply and a demand that could allow for more volunteers.
And if our viewers are interested in this, viewers of any age, anywhere from, 21 on up, to whatever. We think of Miss Lillian, Jimmy Carter's mother, who was a Peace Corps volunteer.
That's right.
She was well in her upper 60s, I believe, or something like that. But they can go to peacecorps.gov and tap into the official website and get more information. And again, it's an exhilarating experience. It's one that will change your life for sure. And you live like the people with whom you're working and in the communities where you're working. But it's just a remarkable experience. Now, you're with the National Peace Corps Association,
That's
NPCA.
Right.
When was that group formed, and what do you do?
It was formed in 1979. It formed as more and more Peace Corps volunteers started coming back home from their service and started to organize amongst themselves. So in some of the major metropolitan areas, Peace Corps volunteers started to find each other and get together. And interestingly enough, many early volunteers were classroom teachers, went on to the field of education when they returned home, and many met at teachers' conventions. And as these groups started to organically form, at some point they said, we really need to have a national umbrella to unite us and bring us together. And that led to the formation of our organization. And it's important to note, we are a separate entity. We're a nonprofit, non-governmental organization. And my colleagues at the National Peace Corps Association are not Peace Corps employees, but we share a lot of the same values and hopes and aspirations as our friends at Peace Corps headquarters.
And what is your website for our viewers?
Yeah, so our website is www.peacecorpsconnect.org, and we have a vibrant website and opportunities, and are, like so many organizations, are active on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram and other social media to try to connect our community. And as well, we try to take a broad approach in that it's not just about the returned Peace Corps volunteers. It's also about people that served our country as staff at the Peace Corps. It also entails people that are family members or share the ideals of Peace Corps service. We try to make our tent as big and open as possible.
Often I have people ask me and say, is the Peace Corps still around? You never hear about the Peace Corps. But it's gone through dips and valleys, peaks and valleys over the years. What is the current state of the Peace Corps? You mentioned we have 7,500 volunteers. They could use probably 10,000. But what are some of the challenges confronting the Peace Corps today?
So the Peace Corps is holding its own, I'd say, right now. So as one of the interesting things about our organization, about the National Peace Corps Association, is that the Peace Corps is not able to make the case to Congress or reach out to its alumni and say, we need you to support our budget. But that's one of the roles that we do through our advocacy program. we have the capability to reach out to our members and say, let's support and keep the Peace Corps funding strong. And it's been holding its own in the last few years. So in the last couple of years, the administration has proposed modest cuts to the Peace Corps budget. But the good news is that the Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, has basically said, no, we want to at least keep level funding for the Peace Corps. We wish it was more, because we're losing a little ground every year that funding is level. You lose a little bit of ground due to cost of living increases. But at least the funding level has not deteriorated.
Now, you have Peace Corps Association groups around the country. This week, you're blanketing Kentucky. You're out talking to people all around the state of Kentucky. You were just over in West Kentucky. Tell us what happened at that meeting. What did you talk about? And if they have a website, can you share it with us?
Yeah, it's kypeacecorps.org, I believe. And they're a great group, and you can also just find them by Googling Kentucky Peace Corps Association. So it's a great group of people, long established, and that's another part of our work, is we have approximately 170 affiliate groups around the country of varying identities, many based geographically like the Kentucky group, many that are formed by the country where they served. In your case, Bill, as I know you know, there's a very active Friends of the Dominican Republic group. But we've been down here talking about and meeting with Kentucky volunteers, for one thing, to make sure that we reach out to all corners of the state of Kentucky, because in all corners of the state of Kentucky, you can find returned Peace Corps volunteers. So I've had a great opportunity just the other night, last couple of nights, being in Murray, being in Bowling Green. Last night I was in Berea, and we'll be moving up north to Covington later this week, and connecting with members and talking about some of the projects, including a really exciting project that we're working on with the Kentucky group right now.
Now, when Peace Corps volunteers are talking to, be it members of Congress or to their neighbors or people who may have an interest in becoming a Peace Corps volunteer, what do they talk about? Do they talk about their experiences? Do they talk about how important it is to reach out, to lend a hand, to help people in developing countries to become more culturally sensitive, to help people better understand the U.S.? What are some of the issues they talk about?
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things about serving as a Peace Corps volunteer, but a lot of the rules when talking to your elected officials apply regardless of what issue you're talking about. But definitely one thing we hear from congressional staff is, while you want to always come and bring those facts and those figures, and those are important to bring, and we try to do that, it's also sharing those experiences and sharing those stories and really putting a human face on the issues that you're talking about. And that applies to all sorts of global issues these days. When we were down in Murray, we were talking, and I was asked that question about, how do you break through sometimes? And while as a Peace Corps volunteer, you might want to be talking about your experience working in a small village and what you did and who you met, if someone's passionate about an issue like climate change, or an issue like refugee assistance, being able to talk about individual people or communities and the impacts and what that means for those people, showing that passion from your heart makes a big difference, I think, in trying to make your case.
I remember when I was in the Peace Corps, the first year I worked as a rural community developer out in the middle of nowhere with no electricity, no running water. The second year I was at the Catholic University Madre Maestra in Santiago, the second largest city, which was quite a contrast between the rural area and the urban area. But I felt like I did a little bit of good while I was in the Dominican Republic. But when I came back, I felt like I really gained more out of it, perhaps than what I contributed to helping the Dominicans. Now, I have no way of proving that, but it certainly put me on a path towards international activities. Do most volunteers feel that way?
I think so, and we experience that, because one of the things that I know from my time at the National Peace Corps Association is that a lot of our focus on a day-to-day basis with our advocacy focuses on those Peace Corps policy issues and those Peace Corps funding issues, because we are the alumni group that, and probably about the only group that regularly is advocating for those issues. At the same time, I know for sure that there are many, many of our members who are actively involved in a variety of global issues and are interested in the opportunities that that they want to bring forward. And what we're doing right now with this, our work in Kentucky, is trying to look for avenues to connect those people to others who are concerned about global issues, so that Peace Corps experience and that Peace Corps voice can be lent to those key issues.
Now, the United States, as every country, has hard power and soft power. Hard power might be the military, maybe some type of heavy types of approaches to dealing with problems. The soft power is persuasion, education, involvement, those types of things. The Peace Corps obviously is in the soft power category. How does that fit into the overall goals of the United States foreign policy?
I think most people that are engaged in foreign policy agree that one aspect of our foreign policy does not address all the needs that are out there. And indeed, earlier this year, 150 retired 3- and 4-star generals wrote to the president expressing the importance of the soft power, of our diplomacy efforts, of our development efforts, and saying that those are key elements of what we do when we reach out to the world. And certainly the Peace Corps is a big part of it, but also our diplomats are an incredible part of that effort to try to share American experiences at the diplomatic level. Many non-governmental organizations doing great work, some of whom have been on your show in the past, are organizations that lend that helping hand that is not easily forgotten by the folks that they serve. And so it becomes very, very important and vital, absolutely vital to both our foreign policy and also to our national security.
It certainly is, and we need to make as many friends as possible. There is no doubt about it, and the Peace Corps volunteers, when they're in a community, so often they can be out of that community perhaps 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and many people in that community remember them and even stay in touch with them, do they not?
They do. And there's an amazing story, if I could share,
Sure, please do.
That exemplifies that fact. Back in 2016, the National Peace Corps Association had its 55th anniversary conference to celebrate the beginning of the Peace Corps, a conference in Washington, D.C. We started it with an advocacy day on Capitol Hill. We had about 300 people, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, on the Hill. And one of our guests was, who spoke to the group was Carl Eikenberry, a retired lieutenant general in the military, who also went on to become the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan. He shared a story that exemplifies what you just said. When he was ambassador in Afghanistan, there was a moment where there was a terrible, tough firefight in Helmand province. And he went out in the aftermath of that to connect with the military leadership, to walk the grounds, to assess the situation. And that included meeting up with some of the tribal leaders in the village. And as he met them and came into the village, and they realized that these were Americans that were coming in, they started to talk about these two guys, Rick and Bob. And Ambassador Eikenberry was like, is there anybody in our unit that's Rick or Bob? And it turned out that Rick was a U.S. Agency for International Development worker who had helped develop a canal system 50 years ago, or more than 50 years ago, and Bob was a Peace Corps volunteer that served in the area. And that just goes to show, one of the things that's interesting these days too is trying to quantify your success and making sure that we spend our dollars wisely. And some of those things are hard to quantify. And that's a moment, though, that we should not, especially in areas when we're thinking about, do we, war and peace, the ideas and the ideals that come forward when you have people remembering someone who came to help them 50 years ago has such a lasting impression on those communities.
It certainly does, and we do have to focus on trying to build these friendships. And when you can create goodwill and you can have people who think fondly of you and they want to learn more about America, they want to learn about Americans, the institutions, and that type of thing, it's in everybody's best interest to do this. But it is so important. You were in Micronesia. Before we get off the individual Peace Corps, what did you bring out? What were the 2 or 3 most memorable activities or people or whatever that you brought home in your experience?
Well, one thing that's interesting is I've been thinking about, because Kentucky, for one thing, because I'll be going in a couple of days to the International Book Project based up in Lexington. And while I was a Peace Corps volunteer, one of my projects was helping establish a community library. And while it was not through the International Book Project, it was another similar organization at the time that was essential to helping provide books. So that was really an exciting moment. The getting more than getting more yourself than what you give, I think, is a feeling that I share with you, and I think, again, many volunteers share. I learned so much. It was, again, one of the most amazing things I did in my life. And in terms of global issues, too, one of the things that struck me, I was on an island, served on an island that was 1 square mile and 300 people and a highest elevation of about 5 feet. And it's Lamatrek is the name of the atoll. And when I came back, I became energized about the issue of global climate change. Because like some of our cities on the coast here, the place where I served as a Peace Corps volunteer and grew to consider many of those individuals friends and second family, they are at the highest possible risk of the consequences of climate change. And those are the kind of global issues that we need to continue to engage our communities in by sharing our stories and helping people understand that we're all in this as one world together.
That's right. We're all in the blue marble together, and we got to make it work.
That's right.
But you're absolutely right. And this highlights, too, about climate change, which, in my opinion, is the #1 problem we're confronting today. And we see that we're losing the battle. Really, the glaciers are melting, desertification is taking place. We see violent weather conditions that we didn't see 10, 15, 20 years ago. And every city in the United States is on the coast that I know of. They're working furiously to try to figure out how to keep the ocean from coming in. You go to New York, Miami, wherever it may be, Virginia, just along there. Bangladesh is 20% of Bangladesh is going to be underwater within the next 6 years. And Bangladesh is already the most densely populated, one of the most densely populated in the world. So these are problems to be dealt with. Well, in closing, let me ask you just, what message would you have for our viewers to help them think more about the Peace Corps, the role of the Peace Corps, and maybe becoming a Peace Corps volunteer?
I think it's something that people should consider. I think you have to find the moment when it's right for you. Many people do think that, Peace Corps volunteers are a bunch of recent college graduates, and that's not the case, as you noted earlier. And recently there have been volunteers as old as in their 80s who've served in certain countries in certain situations. And then I think the other thing is to be engaged as global citizens. So as we're here in Kentucky on this project to further engage our returned volunteers with other organizations on global issues, a couple of other groups we're working with is 2 of our other affiliate groups, the Peace Corps Community for Refugees, a big issue in our country right now, and a big issue that I know many of our return volunteers feel passionate about. And then also the Peace Corps Iran Association. There were volunteers in Iran in the 1970s, and they are very concerned about the current relations between our country and Iran. And so my message is find your niche and make it count, because everybody raising your voice, this is what our democracy is all about, and it's an amazing opportunity you can go and talk to your elected officials right here in your hometown districts, and that is something that we need to do. We need to make sure every member of Congress knows that there are passionate people who care about issues around the world.
That's very true, Jonathan Pearson, and we encourage everybody, be it somebody in the health industry, somebody who's working as an educator, or if you're a plumber or an electrician, whatever, check into the Peace Corps.
Absolutely.
It's the hardest job you'll ever love,
That's
without
right.
a doubt. Jonathan Pearson, thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.